Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on securing your charity in the age of AI. My name is Lisa Chamet. I'm the head of partnerships at Charity Digital, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all for today's discussion. Whilst we're waiting for others, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box and let us know where you're joining us from. In the meantime, I'll go with a quick introduction about who we are and a few house rules before welcoming our guests. We are Charity Digital, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. We are ourselves a UK charity, and our mission is to help other UK-based non-profits increase their impact by being more digital. We do that through two main activities. The first one is providing access to the software and hardware charities need at heavily discounted rates, including essential antivirus software, and also publishing content, whether that's articles, podcasts, and videos, as well as running webinars and events to educate charity professionals and volunteers on how to make better use of digital tools and technology. So in today's session, we will welcome our partners from the National Cybersecurity Centres, as well as guest speaker from Nominate UK and the National Trust. Before we get started, I just want to share a few house rules and pointers for today's session. The session is being recorded and we will upload it to watch on demand within a week's time. The slides and other resources will also be made available to you by the end of the week, so don't worry if you missed something. Closed captions are available for today's session. To enable these, you can go at the bottom where all of your the little icons are, and you can click on the closed caption, the show caption button to enable these. During the webinar, please ask loads of questions in the Q&A section of Zoom for myself and our guests to address them at the end of the presentation. Feel free to share any other comments, experiences, top tips in the chat section, because we love to hear from you, and especially this very important topic. We really would like to hear what the sector is doing in terms of AI and trialing in terms of AI. If there's any particular question in the Q&A section that you'd like answered, you may be able to upvote, but in any case, we'll do our very best to answer all questions, and if not, we will take them offline. Finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please let us know in the chat. We've got a lovely colleague in the chat ready to help, so we'll do our very best to get the session back to normal as soon as we can. And now, without further ado, let's get started. Obviously, I am joined by a very esteemed guest panelist today. I'm joined by David Seep, who is NCSC's Technical Director for Platform Research. David will keep his cameras off, but he will be very glad to answer loads of questions and be part of today's discussion. Hi, David.
Hi, all. Thank you for having me.
Lovely, welcome. I'm also being joined by Steve Forbes, who is Cybersecurity and Product Leader at Nominate, and Henrik Kirchner, who's Head of IT Operations, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure at the National Trust. Hi all, and welcome.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Brilliant. And without further ado, let's get started. Obviously, today we'll see, how really the sector can address some of the key challenges facing the sector today, exploring what exactly AI is and what it means for charity. And obviously, the first question is, what is AI? And I believe that David can help us get started with that question.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Again, yeah, thanks again for having me all. NCSC regard AI as basically computers doing anything that a human usually would. So there's kind of, you might see a joke online that, AI can just be a series of if statements, and, arguably, yes, that can meet the definition of AI. We also think that things like machine learning is a subset of AI. So one thing a human does is learn, and so when a machine learns, that's machine learning, and we take it to be a subset of AI. Something we think is really interesting, though, is if you look back even only 18 months, AI was really only being developed and done and sort of created by small teams. You might have a data science team or an analysis team who would be, creating AI models and doing things. And then those models just get used as part of analyses or products for the rest of the organization. So maybe 5 people in an organization might be doing AI. What's changed now with generative AI, which we think is worth sometimes calling out a bit separately, is suddenly perhaps your entire organization is asking different things of AI, or trying to get it to create images or to solve their problems. And so one of the interesting challenges for us from a socio-technical point of view on AI is that generative AI means you've gone from 5 people who were probably domain experts creating AI models and creating things for other people to use, to now maybe your entire organization or a good chunk of it is doing their own things with it, kind of getting it to solve problems, etc.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, David, for that background. I don't know if Steve, from a nominate perspective, you also want to provide more to what David shared about the definition of AI and what you're seeing in your world.
I'm certainly not going to argue with the National Cybersecurity Centre's definition of AI. But yeah, I think as David said in that latter part there, the most interesting thing is the proliferation of AI through, almost any tool that you use now is claiming to use AI, even if it is just a set of if statements. Any new software that you buy will claim to have AI in there, and that may be just something very, very simple in terms of like a chatbot that you're kind of talking to, or it may be kind of truly enhanced by the use of AI. So we are seeing it across everything. I think one of the difficult thing is to understand as a consumer of the software is, is it really AI, and what's the AI actually doing, and in kind of what do I need to consider in addition to the things I would normally consider if it has got AI? What are the additional things I need to think about, both in terms of security, its use, and perhaps even kind of where the sources are, where it's getting its data from. So there's all sorts of things now you have to take into account just because something claims to have AI. I think that's a kind of really it's an interesting thing, but also quite a scary thing as well when you think about it.
Absolutely. And obviously, as we are now joined mainly by non-profits and charity representative, what would be the opportunities? And obviously, Henrik, being from the sector, could you walk us through specific examples of how the National Trust has used AI?
Well, I mean, I would much rather talk generically. I'm certainly not going to argue with NCSC, about the definitions. I think that was absolutely bang on. It's probably the best capsule description I've heard. In terms of the democratization or the spread of AI, which Steve referred to, it's universal. And one of the problems that we have in the sector generally is that, with the exception of the larger charities that have sort of sufficient budgets, most of the sector probably don't have even a dedicated IT team, never mind a dedicated security team. So as a result, there's a major opportunity in terms of AI in that it allows for the generation of content very, very quickly. There's also a major vulnerability and a major threat in AI in that it allows a generation of content very, very quickly. It also allows a certain openness to AI-driven attacks. And this is not going to go away. This is already a feature of the standard attack profiles that we see out in the wild, and NCSE could speak to this a lot more than I could. But certainly, we're seeing attacks now mounted by criminals and activists that 2 years ago would have been the reserve of nation states. So the tools are spreading, and there's been a corresponding spread in the market in terms of the uptake of AI, and it's incredibly attractive for a small charity. Being able to use AI to generate content or AI to answer queries, it's very attractive. It's potentially speaking, it's very resource efficient. Potentially speaking, it's very cost efficient. The difficulty, of course, is you still have to have a human in the loop. At some point, somebody actually has to look at this bloody content and say, is this right or is this not? Similarly, if you use AI to sort of extract information or intelligence from large arrays of data, there's all sorts of considerations. The first is, where is the intelligence coming from? Is the information that's being returned, is it true and accurate? Because just because something's on the web doesn't mean that it's right. So again, it's not a universal panacea, and there's every risk that the use of AI tools in a well-meaning use of AI tools can lead you into some fairly dubious territory. And to that end, one of the things that we're putting a lot of time and effort into is producing an ethical framework for the use of AI, because there are ethical, moral, and legal issues, as well as security issues, and as well as all the sort of practical techie stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We ourselves have got loads of content around the ethical implications of using AI. We also did a webinar last year about the using AI to generate content, which we can put some links to in the chat. So yeah, thanks for bringing that, Henrik. From your perspective, Steve, what would be the primary applications of AI in the charity sector?
Yeah, I mean, as Henrik said, there are so many opportunities for it to help with, kind of productivity in terms of generating content and those kinds of things. And I see it a similar evolution as we saw with software, when software moved to software as a service. You used to have to, on your computer, if you wanted a piece of software, you have to get the disk and someone would have to install it. And then all of a sudden, anyone in your organization could go to a website and use software, any piece of software, and put their credentials in, put in details about your organization into the software. And all of a sudden, you've lost a bit of control over where your data is, what software you're using, how it's being used, and all those kind of things. And there was that kind of shadow IT thing started to happen, and with the proliferation of software as a service. And now that's going even further with AI, and that you're not just using a piece of software, you're actually using something that might use the content that you're putting into it. You don't necessarily have control over where that content is stored or how it's being used in the future. And so that kind of policy thing, I think, becomes really, really important, so that people understand what the potential risks are and how your organization is going to manage those risks, or how you suggest they manage those risks, to kind of put those guardrails in place, so you don't reduce the opportunities and the productivity gains, but you do minimize the risk to the organization of these tools kind of being misused, or facing kind of legal action because of something that was put into a chatbot at some point. They're the risks. But I think, as Henrik said, those policies, those guardrails are just become so important, and the education becomes really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The education, and making sure that from a charity's internal policy perspective, everybody is aligned and everybody has got the right tools in place to use AI and to get what they need from AI. And David, back to you. What from an NCSU perspective, and obviously working a lot with charities and other sectors, what would you say are the main shortcomings and threats of AI?
I think I'd probably echo what the other two panelists have said, in that, like, a big risk is using it and putting something out there that's just not quite right, is inappropriate, might have been unethical, etc. Not enough care given. I think on top of all of the guardrails and kind of other important areas that Steve just called out, I think something which has to become bulletproof is the quality control processes that people use. A really sort of dangerous element of large language models particularly is that the things they create look at face value accurate and look fine, and you can often only spot where it's gone wrong if you really, really review it, and possibly with almost like an adversarial mindset, where you think like, oh, it's tried to sneak something through that's wrong, how do I find it? You need a really deep kind of deep quality control process. A great example I have of that was early on in sort of last year. I did a team strategy day, and I think in PowerPoint as an ex-consultant, and so I wrote up the findings from the team strategy day in PowerPoint. But I know some of my colleagues don't think that way, so I used a large language model to turn the PowerPoint into a document, and it looked right. All of the bits that we'd had said were there, but it had very subtly got things in the wrong place. It had got like slight wrong meaning, and one of the team, after reading it, got really upset because they felt that their comments hadn't been taken into account, and I'd misunderstood them when I'd kind of been when I kind of then rephrased the strategy day back to everyone. And so for me, that was kind of a real lesson that, like, I looked at it, I read it, and it looked fine, but you really, the level of quality control you need to do is much higher, because these things sound accurate. So I think there's something in there about, is it ethical to use it? Is the thing it's creating actually accurate, or does it just look accurate? And then I think if you start looking towards using either products or automations or things like then the security challenge gets higher, as you need to make sure that the company who you're using or the service you're using isn't just hoovering up all your data and doing something bad with it. You need to be sure that you're not designing a system that yourself can be abused, etc. And it suddenly gets a lot harder. But I think the main risk for most folk is just the straight, I've used it for something and I don't really checked its output when I put it on my website or mailed it to all of my customers and donations.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very, very good example. And staying alongside the threat and distinguishing credible information from disinformation is sometimes really hard when unless you have some human eyes looking at it and critically reviewing it. So that's an interesting point. Henry, can you give us some specific example of how the National Trust is managing these threats around AI?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm loath to sort of open the kimono too much on what we actually do specifically for obvious reasons, but it's something we're very keenly aware of. And there is the threat has a number of components. There's the straightforward external threat, the bad actors wanting to do bad stuff to you, and our conventional our security architecture is up to the task of managing and containing that threat as it stands today. I make no guarantees for tomorrow. The internal threat, I think, is subtler, and I think David has the right of it when he was talking about the integrity of information, the reliability and the trustworthiness of information, and the conclusions that the algorithm will draw from the information that it hoovers up. And one of the things that we started talking about in the early noughties, those of a similar vintage to myself will remember the knowledge management boom of the early noughties. And one of the things that came out of that was the need for information hygiene, the need to be absolutely sure that any information you hold is accurate. And that has a number of implications in terms of how you manage your data, in terms of the metadata that's associated with each individual data object. So it has a sell-by date, it has a validity indicator, it has a source indicator, so that you can actually say with a degree of confidence that yes, this information is accurate. Because any AI-driven extrapolation from information will go straight off the rails if it's based on duff information or dubious information. So that's one side of things. The other side of things, of course, is that AI allows you to use the entire resource of the entire web. And we all know that 99% of what's on the web, to quote Sturgeon's law, is garbage. And it's inherently unreliable. And I don't mean by that it's all wrong, but it's unreliable. You cannot verify its accuracy, and you cannot verify its reliability, you cannot verify its authenticity. And because AI delivers a very polished product, exactly as David says, it gives the impression of absolute accuracy, it gives the impression of absolute respectability, and exactly as he says, the need for that deep dive and that very deep validation process, and not just a human in the loop, but many humans in the loop at various points, becomes more and more apparent. And the net result is you end up not actually saving that much time because of the extra effort you have to put into validation and checking.
Absolutely, yeah, you're very right. So there's a big element of risk there, and you need to balance the need for efficiency versus the need for accuracy, and providing the right information. Steve, I don't know if you wanted to add more to that as well.
Yeah, I think as kind of Henrik said, that validation of the data source, and it's not always clear when you're using these tools what their data sources are. You can assume that it's coming from the web, but you don't know which parts of the web. And
oh, sorry, muted yourself, Steve. I hear you.
Sorry, I pressed the button there. Yeah, the majority of the web is wrong, is garbage, and particularly if you start to get your AI models looking at forums and social media and those kinds of things, then it turns from garbage into just pure garbage. There's kind of very, very little of genuine quality in there that you might be able to kind of say is reliable. And the fact that these tools give you that content back with such confidence as well, you know, it does, as kind of David said earlier, it really takes that analytical mind to say, is that quite right? You know, quite often you can ask it to give you quotes and things like that if you're doing presentations. Then you find out the quote that is stated was never said by anyone. In fact, was, you know, the time that they say it was quoted was before that person was even born. And so, you know, you're just kind of like, and it was a different age. And you're just like, actually, if I'd stood up on stage and I'd said that, people would be looking at me and thinking, you know, this person's a fool. And, you know, you kind of, your personal credibility is at risk, and not just, you know, from a security perspective, but from your personal credibility. If you start to become reliant on these tools and you lose that analytical mindset, then, you know, that's a real risk to your personal credibility. And I think one of the challenges is, as we've got people entering employment that will start to use these tools more and rely on these tools more, is how can we educate them to have that analytical mind and not just trust everything? You know, as anyone that's got children will know, you know, if something's on social media, then it's true. You know, and it's very difficult to convince them otherwise, just because, you know, the majority of their friends, you know, kind of have said something and it becomes true. So, and that then leaks through to your similar behavior mindset of AI. So if you know, if this chatbot says it's so it's true, then it must be. Therefore, you know, that becomes the truth in people's minds. So I think that's a challenge we've got for the generation that are coming into work now, that will start to use these tools in kind of their everyday work. It's how can we educate them to have that analytical mindset? And that's it's a behavior thing as much as a, you know, as a technical thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as so often with security problems, it's far less to do with the technology and far more to do with the people in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that alarms me slightly is with machine learning is the ability to skew the algorithm, is to mistrain an algorithm. And we've seen this happen before with early chatbots where, you know, inside 24 hours, chatbots that were put up in good faith by large companies, no names, no backdoor, but they're based in Seattle, immediately very, very rapidly turned into spouters of Nazi propaganda simply because of training the chatbot, training the algorithm. And that's alarming, because it's a black box. Nobody knows what the hell's going on in there. And it's very much a leap in the dark.
Particularly when you think about that in the context of democracy and elections and things like that, you know, and we've already seen them being influenced even without these tools. So you add these tools into the mix and that risk becomes really, really quite high.
It does. It's particularly relevant in the third sector for charities, because the reputational impact is a very significant one. Reputational risk is a huge risk that we all carry, simply because, you know, we stand or fall on our revenues, and our revenues are raised through reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. We have and talking about the context of elections, that because 2024 is one of the biggest election years throughout the world, there are even more risks of, you know, misinformation and misuse of AI. I think we have a couple of articles around that pertain obviously to the UK context, but thinking about international charities that maybe attend this panel discussion is also very important for them to keep that into consideration, because like you said, Henrik, the reputational risk from a charity perspective is even greater than.
Oh, it is. But the other point to bear in mind, of course, not so much relevant to the likes of us in the National Trust, but the larger NGOs actually have geopolitical significance in themselves. They are actual actors, and I'm sure David could talk in a lot more detail about this. But it occurs to me that the major NGOs and some of the sort of NGO adjacent organisations in the UN are incredibly open to this kind to attacks or to influence delivered through these means. Exactly as you say, you know, it's an election year. There are nation states that have a declared part of their national security doctrine is the use of misinformation in support of their political objectives. And so it's an alarming time, you know, scary days.
It is. But moving, you know, I know we talked a lot about the risks. So how can, you know, attendees here and obviously larger organizations, how can they mitigate those risks, and how can they ensure that they're operating effectively? I know we mentioned you know, policy frameworks, for instance, but if you have any perhaps other more, you know, practical steps that they should take, that'd be good. Perhaps you know, David, if you want to start on that with a lot of guidance from the NCSC.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of our initial positions would be that it's worth organizations thinking through sort of the risks themselves from AI and LLM, but they don't necessarily need to kind of run off and create sort of policy for every part of their business around AI and LLMs just yet. So one thing we'd say is that if organizations are doing governance well, then their current processes for things like are probably good places to start and might only require small tweaks. So for instance, if organizations are asking the question like, oh, should we use this generative AI based thing to help our website developers? Like, you probably don't need a new process for that. You probably just want to look at your existing process for how do we use any software package or how do we use any provider for our, to help our developers. And so, then you'll be looking at things like the terms and conditions, the privacy, the security, how you're planning to use it. And so you might find that you might need to add small bits to kind of account for some AI specific things, but generally, looking at your existing processes and using test cases where people in your organizations want to try and do something using AI, kind of helping them through the existing processes and making sure they stand up will probably get you pretty far. Specific stuff organizations might want to do, staff awareness is probably our number one thing. So helping people be aware that these things can go wrong and that, they're not the panaceas and, kind of oracles of truth that you might accidentally mistake them to being. And so kind of getting that message out there that, yes, it's great if we can find ways to be more efficient as charities, but, there are some edges to these things. And so, quality control and knowing what you're doing for and having an ethical kind of framework does become important. So I'd say, our light touch approach would be staff awareness front and center of these new things and kind of that they can go wrong. And then just really kind of doubling down on existing processes and making sure that they're fit for purpose with kind of some of the new threats coming in for AI and then new policies where necessary.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's some very good point. Henrik, would you also like to elaborate on what you're doing from trust?
I completely agree with what David says, and he's absolutely right. Not to big this up. I mean, when you come down to it, AI is just another thing that computers do, and we've all pretty much got mature policy and procedural harnesses within which IT is operated. And, the bigger organizations function effectively as IT enterprises. So they pretty much got that nailed. In our case, we treat AI as just another thing that computers do. And if somebody wants to bring an AI product on the stream, then it goes through exactly the same process of software evaluation. Exactly as David says, the testing regime for functional testing, the compliance with non-functional requirements, the information security review, the data protection review, because obviously, as with all other charities, we have a huge GDPR exposure, so we take that stuff very, very seriously. And we do try our hardest to regulate the introduction of new software onto our network. And there is a balance. We are not a top-down, heavily hierarchical organization. We're not locked down solidly because we're a charity. We have staff, we have volunteers who want to do good things, and they want to do good things for other good people. So there's a limit to the number of sticks we can apply. So we try to use carrots as well. We try to make the process as easy and as inclusive as possible. And so far, touch wood, we've been quite successful. What's keeping me awake at night is the increasing integration of AI into the tools that are commonly used. So take, for example, Copilot on the 365 suite. Now, Copilot is pretty much unaffordable for people at the moment at $30 per user per month, but that's not going to be the case forever. And AI is increasingly becoming integrated into things like WebEx and Salesforce, so that Salesforce, which a lot of people will use, will have a very strong AI component going forwards. And that's fine if you know it, and that's fine if you understand it, and that's fine if you can sort of test it and you can evaluate it and train people and you can understand it. My concern is it may well end up happening by stealth, and some well-meaning companies may well introduce an AI component into whatever it is that they're serving you up, and that's specifically where you're buying their services in as a service, where you have no particular control over what they're doing on the other side of the fence. And that is quite an alarming prospect.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we agree as well. And obviously we work, some of our partners are the ones that you mentioned, and we also want to make sure, especially from a third sector perspective, that the voice of the third sector is heard. So we need, the AI proposition is also shaped by the sector for the sector, and not necessarily only from technology providers. And on that we have a couple of workshops in that around that proposition on the 21st of March. So we'll put more details on that in a chat. But yes, yeah, completely agree with you. There's a lot of AI that is going to be added to the tools we're using every day, and we need to fully understand the the extent to which these are going to contribute to the results we're getting, the productivity, etc. And from your perspective, Steve, also what would be the mitigation of the risk, or how to operate effectively using AI from Nominate perspective?
Yeah. So I think part of the thing here is education and awareness, and as Henrik said, these things are going to be used, right? There's no kind of getting away from this. It's becoming part of all the software that we use. So making sure people understand what it is and what it does, and also encouraging them to use it in constructive ways that meet the policies and the frameworks that you've given. If you just say, actually, do you know what, we'll just ban AI. You can't use AI, in the organization. You're just going to create more shadow IT, people using things that, just not telling you about it, and then you won't know about it, and you won't have control over it. So, it's about kind of that kind of positive reinforcement of the policies and the frameworks that you give. What I think the other thing, just to build on something that Henrik said that really resonated with me, was about the tools that we're using now starting to have AI come in, and as they're as a service, you get very little foresight or oversight of what those things are, and I think that becomes a real risk when you're using things, say platforms like this, kind of video conferencing platform and productivity suites, where all of a sudden perhaps the suite starts to, we've talked about kind of LLMs till now, but what about when it starts to kind of recognize facial expressions, or the activity you're doing on a computer, how fast you're typing, what else you're doing whilst you're on a Teams call, and those kind of things. And I can see from a productivity perspective, someone goes, that's great, because I know when someone's working, how long they're working for, how many rests they have, if they're looking tired, do they get enough sleep, all that kind of stuff. But actually, from a privacy perspective, do I want my employer knowing all of that? There's a real kind of line between someone being productive and kind of understanding how you can help them be more productive, into actually you're invading their privacy. And when it starts to read your emotions and your face and all those kind of things, if a tool starts saying, well, actually they were saying this but they didn't actually mean that, because I could tell from their facial expressions, that starts to become a real challenge for us, kind of socially, but also from an employer and employee perspective. And I've seen this in some of the tools that we're seeing now. It starts to tell you how many connections you've had, and how long you've been in meetings or not in meetings, and all that kind of stuff. And and so there's an awful lot of data there. And whilst that's not AI, that's just a collection of data. When you start to add AI on top of that, and we've already talked about the fact that it can make inferences that aren't true, and perhaps employers then start reading that information and taking that as fact, when actually it may be just inferred. So there's all those sorts of things I think we need to think about in the future. It's not something that's right now, but as we go forwards, we need to start thinking about that control over those tools. When these new things are introduced, that we're reviewing them, understanding if it's something we want to use, and kind of feeding back to the software suppliers if it's something, if you can't turn it off, well, actually, either I want to be able to turn it off, or I'm going to switch to a different suite. But yeah, I think it's both a fascinating and also quite a scary world that we're entering into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the fact that you mentioned, if that AI functionality or features is being implemented, is there a possibility to opt out of it? And sometimes, we don't know. Actually, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer for each individual software, but it would be interesting from probably reviewing your IT portfolio and software portfolio to be able to ask that question and to have the answer. From your perspective, also, David, what would be the future of possibilities of AI's impact on society and on the third sector?
It's like as I think Steve was just saying, it's like truly exciting times. I think like in my career in tech so far, this is probably the most excited I've been about sort of technology again. It's so much happening, and I think it's truly exciting that even the creators of these artificial intelligence models don't really know how they're doing, what they're doing, or where it will go. So it's kind of hard to predict. I think we can like probably predict out, or at least make some guesses over the next sort of year or two. I think I think AI is going to go through a bit of a process as people learn that it's quite hard to get some of the benefits that everyone's hoping we'll get. So like whenever we've done research inside NCSC of trying to turn a nice idea into an actual like production automation or something that just does something repeatedly, it's really hard. Like LLMs are incredibly good at giving you a one-off demo of something to show the potential, and they're incredibly bad at doing something repeatedly every time in a way that you can rely on. And so I think over the next year we're going to have a bit of a, I think AI may go through a bit of a winter, or at least a chilling, where people start to realize that it's maybe a little harder to get quite what they were hoping for from it. And then I'm fairly hopeful that we'll come out the other side, and organizations will start to be being able to, more people will be able to code than code who could code before. So we'll be able to kind of be increasingly digital. I think there'll be, I think the societal value of knowing an actual person was involved will get bigger. So, I think maybe people may become inundated with, AI generated things, and suddenly people want, kind of more in-person connections, or, will want to have, to meet charities they're supporting, or know that they're talking to people in the real rather than just talking to, sort of a chatbot. We might see that. And in terms of where we go after that, if you listen to the vendors, they want every AI to be a fully intelligent PhD level person just there to help you on any of your tasks. And so there's a dream state where we can spend less time doing the jobs we don't want to do, and more time doing the things that are valuable for us to do. Whether we'll get there, I'm not entirely sure, but I think there's definitely going to be some hurdles getting there as we hit both the winter of whether they quite live up to the promise, but then also people discovering that sometimes they actually bring new security risks that haven't been managed as well. So it's going to be an interesting few years, but it should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. And what about you, Henrik, in the National Trust world? How are you thinking about the possibilities of AI's impact?
Well, we're keeping a very close eye on it, because it's extremely attractive from many perspectives, in that it allows us to generate attractive and useful content. And we're all about the content. As the curators and the preservers of the national heritage, and of a big chunk of natural England, it's very important to us that we let people know what we're doing. We attract people to come and look at the beautiful things we look after, and come walk in the beautiful countryside we curate. So that in itself is incredibly attractive, as is the fact that inevitably we, as with the rest of the sector, are going to be moving far more of our operations into the digital domain than out of the physical domain, because we're now mature. The old four domains, air, land, sea, space, are now joined by virtual, and it's real now. People have been sort of talking about it off and on for years. Certainly for as long as I've been in technology, which is pretty much since great reptiles roamed the earth. But the day is now dawned, and people need, deserve, and expect a completely fulfilling digital existence. And we can do a lot with AI to guarantee that. We can also do a lot with AI to ruin that for people. So we have to be incredibly careful. And I think Steve's point about obtrusive use of AI for intrusive reasons is very well taken. It brings up the other point. The ethical framework needs to work in both directions. It determines the ethics of use of AI by those who are responsible for operating it, as well as for those who are actually doing it. And I think that was a shrewd point, very well made. I'd agree with David that we're up for, there's going to be a chilling period, but that's inevitable. After every period of tech hype, there's always a chilling period before everybody, puts their toys back in the box and just gets on with their lives and gets ready for the next big thing. I think AI, potentially speaking, has the potential to be revolutionary in its impact on the information industry. And I think the market will probably sort it out, and probably in 3-4 years' time, when we have a much more mature market and a much greater awareness of what the hell you can and can't do, and what it will and won't do, and what you should and shouldn't do with it is more widespread. I think that the impact will be less, or will be more easily contained. I think we're into a particularly sensitive and dangerous period for the next year to 18 months, as people are desperately trying to find benefit from this, and this is where the potential for cock-ups is at its highest, I think.
Mhm. Yeah,
Would strongly echo that.
absolutely. Yeah, they're good. And obviously, I know we mentioned before how can the charity sector upskill its staff, because people are a core element of the use of AI and the ethical use of AI. So obviously, David, do you want to walk us through some of the NCSC advice available?
Yeah, so I think our advice generally is like a good way to be kind of upskilling on these things. So formal and informal training, etc. There are free courses out there. I think a lot of the main vendors do trainings on LLMs and kind of understanding and using them. I would say for us, a good thing, important thing to do is provide a trodden path for people to play with them and start getting their heads around them. So find a model or find a service that you're happy people using and point them at that, because that minimizes the risk that they'll kind of go and find their own way or find something and put data in where you're not happy. I would say I would probably rather an organization goes and finds a model where they're happy people just using it with all of their organizational data, perhaps because it's a paid for model or because they've reviewed the T's and C's carefully, than telling people not to use it or to make their own choice, because we find on the latter that leads to people putting it somewhere you're more worried about. And so it's often better to just provide kind of a trodden path to one that you're happy them using, and that way them getting their head around it. But I think we have found that playing with them and getting your own feel for where they're good, where they're bad is really important in a way that you can't fully learn from a presentation or from a talk. You do need to talk to them a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. And obviously the NCSC has got great, great resources available as well. How about you, Steve, from your perspective? Any other things you'd like to add to David's point?
Yeah, no, I think David was spot on. I would just add that perhaps some that there are training materials available from a lot of the major providers, but it may help organizations to do some of their own training in the use and how those tools might be used by the organization in a constructive way, and how they might not be very constructive. So as kind of Henrik was pointing out earlier about some of the materials being created and kind of the ethical concerns around it and things like that, or the how valid they are, kind of taking people through that process so they can see the pros and the cons, but also pointing towards some of the things where it can be really powerful. So summarizing large amounts of content and those kinds of things, and then getting people to think about how that could how it can help them and what the risks are. So kind of doing workshops and those kinds of things, just as you would do for any kind of cybersecurity when you're doing kind of training around kind of phishing and those kinds of things. It's like actually taking it through people in the context of the job that they do, rather than a kind of theoretical thing where because you always learn better when it's in the context of something you understand and are doing on an everyday basis.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And how about you, Henrik? Any further thoughts or comments around the upskilling of staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something you can say about the UK third sector, which is that the bulk of the UK third sector is it's a huge constellation of relatively small organisations, which have limited resources, and a lot of them don't even have a full-time IT guy, never mind a full-time security guy, and that can be an issue. And people like you and the NCSC and various others are doing their bit to try to weld this together and provide communities of interest, and to allow for the pooling and the sharing of information and knowledge. And I think that one of the issues that the sector as a whole faces is that most people involved in the sector are so busy doing what they're doing for a charitable purpose that they haven't really thought very much about the IT side of things, never mind the security side of things, and certainly never mind the AI side of things. So the more we can do in terms of educating the sector as a sector, the more we can do in terms of outreach. And I think it's probably down to some of the larger players in the sector to do their bit. And certainly we work quite closely with NCSC, and we support the NCSC in their initiatives, and we very much appreciate the work they do and very much appreciate the resources they make available. But we do have to find some way of reaching out further into the wider third sector, because the wider third sector is where the major exposure is. I don't want to be smug about this, because we're in no way perfect, but we are better protected and we're better prepared simply because we're bigger and we have economies of scale, and we have, you know, fewer budgetary constraints, and we have the luxury of having, you know, full-time dedicated resources working on this stuff. And that's not the case for most of the sector. And I think that would be my worry for the sector.
So having, well, supporting staff in sort of trusted self-learning, you know, opportunities provided by the NCSC. Obviously, we can amplify the work of the NCSC, and also having, I guess, loads of conversations with, you know, within the sector as to what training is available, affordable, from trusted providers.
Yeah, or even just sparking the conversation, because I guarantee you that probably 70% of the trustees out in the big wide world of the third sector have never thought about this. And, you know, they have a number of obligations under, you know, a number of legal obligations. They have a number of other obligations, moral and ethical obligations to the charities they oversee. And, you know, one doesn't want to terrify them, of course one doesn't, but, you know, one does want to make them aware of the fact that there are some issues there that need to be considered.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely.
I think NCSE have been thinking about this. I think David's probably got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, sorry, I was just putting into the chat links to some of the resources we we do have and where we would advise folk. So yeah, I think there's probably a bit of a gap at the moment which we're looking at internally around advice for how do organizations kind of choose a chatbot, or choose, you know, or how do they kind of embed those in into an organization. We've got some good stuff for people who are building systems that might use these things. But yeah, I think one thing we need to kind of we're working on, and I'll take back, is just we probably need to have some good guidance for people wanting to, you know, how do you adopt these things more safely beyond a statement saying make sure your existing processes are fine. But I'll drop some of the links to existing content in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to the three of you for sharing your insight and expertise. It was very much appreciated. I'll go into the questions from our audience, because there already have been quite a few in a section. For all of you, know, that have been attending, please do share your questions and we'll go through them. First one from David, and he was referring to obviously the Copilot and ChatGPT and Bing. David says that I've had incorrect information from ChatGPT before. Can he ask if he can use AI generated images on their website instead of stock images? What would the guidance be? Steve, do you want to?
I think that tends to come down to where you're generating them from and their terms and conditions. So whether it's free to use for, you know, and they'll state for what purposes it's free to use, or whether quite often these things have a premium. You know, there's a free thing and it might have a watermark or something on it, and then there's and you can't use those for kind of commercial purposes, and then there's a paid for version. Tends how these things work. So really it's down to the terms and conditions of each of the tools that you're using.
Yeah.
But a really good point to kind of reinforce that, you know, when we talked about the kind of the use of these things is, you know, I might put my organization at legal risk by using something that's got some terms and conditions that refrain me from doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as we've seen that again, ChatGPT there are some court cases at the moment with some artists suing ChatGPT for using some of their artwork without the rights. So it's certainly a very interesting one. We can probably share a little bit more articles we've written on the matter, but it's best to check, you know, terms and conditions around using that. And a similar question from Sue, actually. Is there a way to ask AI to give references to validate its information?
Well, there is, but you know, it's not reliable. You know, because, you know, a large language model, you know, even if only 1% of the references it cites are incorrect, that invalidates the entire thing. So I would be very, very, very wary. And any references cited, I would check back. And that's back to this idea of the human in the loop. So if there's a quote, for example, attributed to somebody, I would go back and look. I would go back and look for that and make sure it's for real.
Yeah, absolutely agree. David, you also want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say again here, they're really dangerous, because if you ask them for references, they'll give you an incredibly good thing that looks like a reference. Like I was doing academic research, and I was like, oh, where have you got that fact from? And it gave, a perfectly formatted academic reference, and looked, and the journal existed and the author existed, but they worked in a different field and they never published on that thing at all. So you definitely can't just ask them. The Copilot thing that was mentioned in the chat, an approach you can do is and this is something that I don't think individual, charities, for example, would do, but the people who sell these models and the vendors and the service providers, they are working on it, is something called grounding, which is where you try and take the answer from the LLM and then separately look up the reference yourself, but with automation.
Yeah.
And so one thing Copilot's doing is it's saying, yep, here was the data that went into the answer. So those references are not just Copilot pinky swearing that's where it got the information from. Those are separately validated. But that's something I don't think any individual charity could do. That's a property of the service you might procure. They have to do it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both. A question from Helen, who is asking. So you said we talked about minimizing legal action if something comes out of a chatbot. Do charities need to put something on their website that says that they do not have control of what it's said from an AI tool about the organization? There's a way to minimize legal action. I don't know who would like to take that. David?
I think, again, it comes down to real specifics. And I think if you're doing anything that you're going to be putting on your website, then you definitely, the kind of NCSC guidelines for secure systems, you want to be looking at that. But you want to be doing kind of full sort of like legal reviews, ethics reviews. Is that an appropriate thing to be doing? What's the harm that could be caused if it goes awry? And have you properly made sure that it won't go awry with the right kind of guardrails and things? So I think, if you're doing anything where you're putting something publicly on your website that is able to create content using AI, you want to do a full sort of legal, ethical, all of those other reviews, because it's hard.
And talk to your legal department to get an appropriate form words. Keep them involved. The legal department and the communications department need to be absolutely involved in all parts of this.
Yeah, absolutely. You're very right. And obviously, if you're developing a chatbot that uses AI tool, it's very important to ask these questions to the providers and be extremely thorough in your due diligence review with these providers. Moving on to the next question. Somebody says they are at the start of the AI journey and working on creating an AI strategy, policies and framework, and they're asking if there's any example of AI policies that could be shared or any pointers.
Well, there's a fair amount of resource available. A simple web search will produce a representative handful, including some from respectable organisations who've seen fit to share their policies, just as an example to the others. And I think that the approach that I would suggest is, downloading as many of these as you can get hold of and having a good, long, hard look at them, and seeing whether you can synthesize from those various inputs something that's fit for purpose for your organization, that fits with your existing policy infrastructure, and that will do what you want it to do. As with all policy development, there isn't a shortcut. I think this is certainly something that Steve and David, I think, would definitely have views on.
Yeah,
you could always ask an LLM to create one for you.
Yeah, that's an idea. And then you could ask another one to summarize it.
That's right. Yeah. But yeah, I think as Henrik said, have a look around. I remember when GDPR and the reincarnation of kind of Data Protection Act came out. There was lots of people scrambling around for policies around data protection and GDPR, and what we saw was an influx of people happy to share things, and there will be organisations, I imagine, that will evolve from AI, kind of becoming more democratized, where people will have an interest in this, and that might be organizations around that kind of data protection, those kind of things. But we'll start to see these things come more to the forefront, I think, in terms of people wanting to help organizations with their policies. So yeah, but again, check your sources, make sure it's come from a reputable organisation.
No, thank you, all of you. And couple of last questions. Please keep them coming if you have any. A question from David, who understand that there are statistical methods for determining whether any content has been likely generated by AI, whether that's words, images, or video. Do we think we get to the point where all content everywhere might be legally required to have an AI probability score at broadcast? In terms of, you know, where we think this might go. And David, you got your hands up.
So the hard thing here is that at the moment the research doesn't look like you can just tell whether something has been created by AI. I don't know if you've seen, but there's websites out there which claim to, but they get it very, very wrong. So I think my favorite example was the US Constitution was put into one of them, and it said it was 100% AI written, which it, you know, is interesting philosophically if true, but is probably not true. So I would almost go, one thing your comms team might want to think through the risk is, what if someone says something you've put out there is AI generated when it wasn't? Because, like, you know, people do things, you know, people on Twitter will try and, you know, take something and put it through and then say, oh, no, this was AI generated. And, you know, there's a good chance it wasn't. It was just, you know, it just flagged the thing. Now, a bunch of the people, particularly who create images and videos, so the vendors out there creating pictures and videos, are trying to find ways to kind of almost hide evidence in the videos and pictures that would prove that they created it, you know, so that their services can't be abused for sort of, you know, disinformation, etc. But the problem is those solutions are only as good as, like, people's ability to bypass them. So, for instance, if you take the image that's been generated and flip it left, you know, mirror it left to right, does that break it? You know, if so, then people can, you know, will still be able to kind of, you know, create it. So the way I see it going instead, in terms of the kind of, you know, how do we know what's true online, is instead I'm hoping for something like increased AI-driven automation that helps us kind of quickly verify the factual accuracy of a statement. So if something is put out there, some kind of LLM-based agent system that basically says, oh yes, I can actually evidence the things they're saying on these websites, or says actually there's no evidence for these things, or there is partial evidence but it's being misinterpreted on this website. So almost more automate the fact checking than kind of automate the detection of AI content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. Steve and Henrik, I don't know if you want to also add to that.
Go on, Steve.
After you, Henrik.
Yeah, I mean, really just to agree with David, because the AI is moving faster than the ability to identify AI artifacts. So his solution of, you know, cut straight to the chase and just look at the content that's delivered and check, you know, examine the content for validity and don't really care how it came about. And you could apply exactly the same tool to, you know, human generated content to check the validity of the statements and the facts and the citations in that. And I think that's a shape of the future, and that's a fit use for AI actually. And, you know, similar usage is already in place for things like plagiarism detection in academic papers. And I think that's it's an exciting field.
Absolutely. Steve, you want to add?
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say a similar thing, really. But you know, the more advanced AI becomes, you know, it's artificial intelligence. That's what it's kind of designed to do. The more you can imagine that it becomes harder to spot that something's artificial intelligence, because, you know, it's learning, and you know, perhaps that's one of the things that, you know, it tries to do is become more natural and less like artificial intelligence. So then it becomes harder and harder to detect it. And I was going to pick up on that point of plagiarism, Henrik. You know, there are lots of tools out there that universities and schools use now to detect plagiarism.
Yep.
And lots of education establishments have banned their students from using LLMs for their essays and those kinds of things. I imagine right now it's very difficult for them to detect whether something has come from an LLM. And is that a problem that's ever going to be solved? And perhaps people need to think about whether it should be solved.
Well,
and as we said, you know, going to the kind of trusted sources, and you know, perhaps this is just a way of life in the future. And so we have to think about, you know, not whether it was created by an LLM or not, but, you know, how was it analyzed, and what's the kind of construct of it, and think about the marking of those essays in a completely different way than we do today. I think that, which is, I think, a very encouraging thing for education in the future, as well as a challenge.
Yeah, because what becomes important is the artifact rather than the process that was used to generate it. Absolutely, and you know, I tend to agree. I'm pretty relaxed about something if it's been, whether it's been produced by AI or by my brother-in-law. You know, if it's a good piece of work and if it stands up to rigorous analysis, then it's fine. You know, I don't care.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But great. Well, thanks. That's all we're going to have the time for today. Thank you very much to the three of you for joining, and thank you for everybody for attending this webinar. We hope you found it helpful and that you will have other resources to go and deep dive into the topic. Just before we leave, obviously we have an event the 21st of March in London at Resourceful London, and these workshops, some of these workshops will actually be hosted by the NCSC, which will help provide cyber support for senior leadership teams. But we also have an artificial intelligence stream with 2 workshops, one from CAST and another one from WinAI, and which is essentially about what do we need to learn from each other in the realm of AI, and AI in action, making it work for you. So there are quite a few more details about these sessions on our website, and obviously my colleagues in the chat, put it in the chat. But if you're interested in, you know, network with peers, get some expert guidance, and hopefully make a little bit more sense of what this all means for your organization, please do join us on the 21st of March for these workshops. In the meantime, we really hope that you have a great rest of the week, and thank you all for joining, and thank you to Steve, Henrik and David.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.